Hi, this is Sue Jackson, and I'm back with another Friday Reads. I have a great update for you this week. Before we get to the books, I mentioned last week that we had friends staying with us for the week. We had a wonderful time with them, just great. It was my husband's best friend from high school and his wife, who I'd never met before. And we got along great. She loves to read, and we had a lot of other things in common, so it worked out really well. We had a wonderful time. They left on Saturday, and then by noon on Sunday, we were all packed up and ready to go on a camping trip. October's just so packed full of stuff for us. The schedule's just crazy, and we just decided we needed a little outdoor time. I love fall. October is one of my favorite times to camp, and yeah, I just felt like we had to get out there, even if it was a really quick trip. So we just booked 2 nights at a state park here in Delaware, just a little over an hour south of us, Killens Pond State Park. I will be putting up a short vlog next week, probably Tuesday, so keep an eye out for that. But it was just incredibly relaxing. It was just what we needed. I mean, we did very little. We did take a short walk on Monday, but other than that, we went Sunday to Tuesday. Other than that, well, I'll show you how I spent most of my time. Yeah, that's what I love about camping. Just lots of extra reading time. And this was a super chill trip. So that worked out great, and now we're back home. I just came back from a short walk at our local nature center because I was missing all that. I needed a little outdoor time. Beautiful, beautiful day. Okay, so what I've been reading. I have been reading a fabulous book, Bad Girls Never Say Die by Jennifer Matthew. She is the author. She writes a lot of YA. That's what this is. She's from Houston. She's the author of Devoted, Afterward, The Liars of Mariposa Island, and The Truth About Alice. But the book you may have heard the most about is her novel Moxie, which was made into a Netflix movie, which I watched a few years ago. More than a few now, but I really enjoyed that movie. So when this came up for review, and as usual, I am way behind. They don't even send out print books for review anymore most of the time. Yeah, so this was 2021. Not as bad as I thought. I absolutely loved this book. It's set in 1964. One thing I didn't realize until I was almost all the way through it was on the flap, it says, a gripping, gender-flipped reimagining of The Outsiders that explores the deep bonds of female friendship and what it takes to be a bad girl. As I've mentioned before on my channel, sorry, Jess, it's still true. I have not yet read The Outsiders. I'm getting close. I did buy a copy in a used bookstore while we were on vacation recently. You can check out my bookstore vlog. So I am going to read it, and especially after reading this, that gives me some extra motivation. So the main character is a 15-year-old girl named Evie. It's 1964 in Houston. Evie has seen some things going on with her older sister, and her mother's always telling her that the most important thing in life is to find a nice, stable man who will treat you right and provide for you. And that just does not sound like a life that Evie wants. She's kind of freaking out that her mom keeps saying this and seeing what's going on with her sister. And so she gets herself in with a group of what are known as bad girls. And by the time this book opens, she is a part of their group. She's good friends with Connie, Juanita, and Sunny. So the 4 of them are very close. They spend a lot of time together. They skip school together, you know. So in the opening scene, they are at the local drive-in, hanging out on a Friday night. Their whole crowd is there, but also the rich kids from the other side of town are there. And something really horrible happens to Evie. The events of that evening bring together Evie and a girl from the right side of the tracks named Diane. Now, in ordinary life, these two would probably never speak to each other. But what happens that night brings them together. And the two of them begin to form a friendship as they're trying to deal with the events of that night. So it is indeed about the deep bonds of female friendship. It's a very gripping, suspenseful novel because there's some fallout from what happens that night at the drive-in. She has created some fabulous characters that you really get to know deeply. There's a lot of emotional complexity here. This novel really makes you think about the role of girls and the role of women, especially back in the 60s. And, you know, things, in some ways we've come a long way, in other ways, not so much. It is a fabulous book. I sped through it. I was so glad that I was reading this while we were camping because I could just completely lose myself in the story and just read. I only had to put it down for meals. Okay, and I too occasionally talk to my husband, but he was reading too, so great novel. I definitely want to read more from her, and now I am even more determined to finally read The Outsiders. So here's a book that I saved for October, 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart. It's dark, fairy tale, fantasy kind of stuff. I thought it would be perfect for the month of October. And I have read a few of the stories in here. This was a Booktopia book this year. I'll link down below if you want to see my video about Booktopia. Jenna Rose Nethercott is the author, and she was fabulous at Booktopia. She was so full of energy and vitality. She was a wonderful speaker. In fact, she didn't just speak. She actually literally acted out parts of this. It was wonderful. And yeah, so I really want to like this. And I have some of the stories I've enjoyed, but I'm struggling with it because it's not my usual kind of thing. I don't read much fantasy. This has some elements of horror, fairy tales. Don't really read those anymore either. So yeah, and by anymore, I did read more horror back in my youth. I was a Stephen King fan along with the rest of my family. So I'm not giving up on it. But I think I tend to be a completist. I have trouble, even with a magazine, I have to read from the front to the back. I don't skip anything. So that can get in my way sometime. So rather than be a completist here and read it from beginning to end, I think I'm going to pick and choose some of the stories in between my other books that appeal to me and see how that goes. But if you like fantasy, fairy tales with a touch of darkness, then this is right up your alley. And she is a very good writer. I believe in my Booktopia video, I included a clip of her performing one of her stories from here. So I think you'll enjoy that. The book I've just started is November Road by Lou Berney. I had read all kinds of rave reviews about this book. It's an older book. I stand corrected. It's not that old. It's from 2018, but it's not a new release is what I meant. There's a blurb on here from Stephen King. When people say they want to read a really good novel, the kind you just can't put down, this is the kind of book they mean. Exceptional. And it won the Hammett Prize for Best Novel of the Year. So I got this for my husband a few years ago, having heard rave reviews like that, and he really enjoyed it. It was one of many books that I buy for him, but when he finishes it, I say, move it over to my side of the shelf. I want to read it too. So I've only just started it, but I can already tell it has the elements to be something that I will love. It begins in New Orleans. I used to live in New Orleans. Love, love, love reading about anything set in New Orleans. And this is actually set in 1963, but yeah, but even back then, you know, I know all the street names. I know the places that they're talking about. It's a road trip novel. Love a road trip and love reading about a road trip. So I'm only at the very beginning. So far, 2 sets of characters have been introduced. The first is Frank Gidry, who lives in New Orleans. He works for a crime boss named Carlos. Yeah. So he's often asked to do things that are questionable, far more than questionable. That wasn't the right word. Things that are downright criminal. He's worked his way fairly high up in the organization, so he feels like he's in a good place. And then something happens. Well, it takes place in November 1963, so you know what happens in November 1963. In alternating chapters, we meet a family in New Orleans, a wife with 2 children, 2 girls who are 7 and 8, and a husband who's a drunk and can't keep a job. She wants to be a photographer. She actually wants to be a photojournalist, and she works at a photography studio, but as an assistant. So she's got dreams for her life, but not much hope that they'll ever come true. They're in a tiny town in Oklahoma. She loves her little girls, who are adorable. But, you know, she was hoping she'd get more out of life. So, yeah, it is November 1963. Kennedy is assassinated, and we're getting the reactions of both parties in these different places. So I think that their paths will cross. I know that Frank Gidry is about to leave on a road trip to Texas, so we'll see what happens next. But my husband really enjoyed it. Stephen King really enjoyed it. So, and so far the writing's great. November Road by Lou Berney. And finally on audio, I am still listening to The Tobacco Wives by Adele Myers. This book has surprised me in a good way. Yeah, I wasn't sure what to make of it at first, but interestingly, because this, of course, had a 15-year-old female narrator, The Tobacco Wives has a 15-year-old female narrator as well, and it takes place just after the war, World War II. So I think it's like 1946. Her mother drops her off. Her father was killed in the war. Her mother's not handling it well. So her mother drops her off in the town of Brightleaf, North Carolina, to live with her aunt for a while. Her aunt is a seamstress, a very talented seamstress. And the girl, Maddie, usually spends a month during the summer with her aunt. So she's getting to be a fairly talented seamstress as well. But if you hear that knocking on our front door, it's our skull. Got a giant plastic skull that I put up every year for Halloween, and it's a very windy day, so it keeps knocking. So just ignore the knocks. It's just our ghost. So Maddie's lost her father. Her mother abandons her. She loves her aunt, though, and she wants to help her. But normally, you know, she spends a month with her aunt during the slow season. Now, her mother's dropped her off during her aunt's busiest time of year. It is gala season in this tobacco town. So there is a huge tobacco company that is everything to this town. Keeps all the other businesses in business, keeps everyone employed. This is the major industry here. Even the paper mill, mostly its primary customer is the tobacco company making cigarettes. The tobacco wives of the title are the wealthy wives of the bigwigs in town. The ones who work for the tobacco company, as well as a doctor and lawyer, things like that. So there's a lot here about class. And at first I thought, okay, this is just kind of an interesting, historical fiction with an interesting glimpse of a certain time and place. But then about a quarter of the way into the book, there's a plot twist that made me kind of sit up, even though I was listening and walking around, and say, oh, there's more to this book than I thought there was. So it gets into some really interesting, intriguing issues about women's rights, because one of the things going on at this time is the men are coming home from war and the women have been the ones working in the factory. So the men are coming back to displace them. As I said, there's a lot here about class. There's a lot here about corporate responsibility. So yeah, I loved what happened to make this a more complex, intriguing novel. So it is an interesting time and place. The setting is very interesting. I've never read anything about the tobacco industry during this time before, but it's got a lot of meat to it. This is our book club pick for this month. We meet next Wednesday, and this is going to be a great discussion because there's a lot here to talk about. So that's The Tobacco Wives by Adele Myers. I think I've only got less than an hour to go on it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all wraps up. We're kind of at the climax right now. Something big is about to happen. So I'm looking forward to that. I always forget that I said I was going to tell you what my husband's reading as well. He has been reading Dracula based on my recommendation. I listened to it on audio. I don't know. You've probably figured out by now, I have no concept of time, but maybe 5 to 7 years ago, I listened to it on audio. So while we were in one of those bookstores on our recent trip, he picked up a copy for himself and he's reading that now and he's enjoying it. Perfect book for October. So that's what we're reading this week. Please let me know in the comments down below what you're reading.